courtroom version, not the press release version. The real version, what it actually felt like to be in that man's orbit before everything collapsed. And Joe Budden just gave us a window into exactly that. Not a rumor, not something he heard from somebody else. A first-hand account of sitting inside Diddy's house, before the Revolt job, before any of this went public, and having a private conversation that now, looking back, reads completely differently than it did in the moment. Joe Budden has been in this industry for over 2 decades. He has worked with some of the biggest names in music and media. He is not someone who talks loosely or gives away information without thinking about it. So when he sits down on his own podcast and starts telling a story that begins with the words, "This was supposed to stay private, but I got a podcast with millions of listeners," you stop whatever you are doing and you listen. Because what he described in that meeting is not just a funny story about starting a new job. It is a portrait of how Diddy operated, how he presented himself to people coming into his circle, and what he said, and what Joe Budden thought in response but did not say out loud, tells you more about the dynamic inside Revolt than any official statement ever could.
Oh, dog.
He was on Revolt.
Yeah, Revolt, yeah. Oh, well, fuck
Really?
me. What we talking about? Fuck. Take that, nigga. Take that.
Before we get to the meeting itself, you need to understand the context of how Joe Budden ended up in Diddy's world in the first place. Because it was not a random connection. Joe Budden joined Revolt, Diddy's media network, and that relationship meant that at some point, the two of them had to sit down and actually talk. Now, Joe Budden is not someone you would describe as an easy hire. He has a reputation. He has always had a reputation. He is opinionated, he is outspoken, he pushes back, he does not soften things to make people comfortable. That energy is exactly what makes him compelling on a podcast and exactly what makes him a complicated employee in a corporate media environment. So when Diddy heard that Joe Budden was coming to Revolt, when that name crossed his desk, the first thing Diddy apparently did was ask around. He made calls. He talked to people who knew Joe, and what came back was a picture of someone with real talent and real volatility in equal measure. That is when Diddy decided a private meeting was necessary before anything else moved forward. That room when Joe starts telling this story is telling, because even the people around him know that the idea of Joe Budden going to Diddy's house for a private sit-down is inherently dramatic. These are two very specific kinds of energy in one room, and the meeting that followed was exactly as loaded as you would expound piece by piece, because every sentence of what Diddy said in that meeting is worth examining. First, Diddy opened by telling Joe exactly what he had heard about him. He did not pretend he had not done research. He did not play it cool like he was coming in neutral. He laid it out directly. "I heard you were crazy. I heard you were a lunatic. I heard you have done wild things." That is Diddy telling Joe, "I know your file. I know who you are before you even open your mouth in this building." Second, and this is the part that is easy to miss if you are just listening casually, Diddy said he did not mind any of it. He was not sitting across from Joe to tell him to change who he was or tone himself down. He was sitting across from Joe because he saw something in that reputation that he believed could be valuable. The wildness, the unpredictability, the willingness to say things other people would not say. Diddy wanted that energy inside Revolt. He just wanted it pointed in the right direction. Third, and this is where it gets interesting, Diddy drew one very specific line. If you hit somebody, if you throw something, if you do something that puts this business in jeopardy, you are done. Zero tolerance, no second conversation, no HR process, you are gone. That is a very specific set of rules for someone to lay out at the beginning of a professional relationship. Most employers say things like, "We expect professionalism, we expect punctuality, we expect collaboration." Diddy's opening terms were essentially, "Do not physically harm anyone on my property or in my name," which tells you something about the kinds of situations Diddy was apparently used to navigating inside his own organization. Joe Budden says he appreciated hearing it directly. He respected the clarity of it. And genuinely, in that moment, he felt good about the conversation. And then, in his head, not out loud, he said, Budden is very precise about how he frames that meeting in hindsight. He does not say Diddy was being fake. He does not say it felt sinister in the moment. He says Diddy looked at him like a new hire with potential, and that the whole conversation was essentially a risk assessment. That framing is actually really important, because a risk assessment is not a personal conversation. A risk assessment is a business calculation. Diddy was not sitting across from Joe Budden as a mentor or as someone genuinely invested in Joe's well-being. He was sitting across from Joe Budden as a business owner evaluating whether the asset in front of him was worth the liability that came with him. And Joe understood that. He understood it then, and he understands it even more clearly now. The warmth in that meeting, the "I heard about you and I want to give you a shot" energy, was not personal affection. It was Diddy deciding that Joe Budden's value to Revolt outweighed the risk of bringing in someone with his reputation. Which is why the ditto moment is so sharp, because when Diddy finished laying out his zero tolerance policy, if you do something that puts this business in jeopardy, you are gone. Joe Budden's internal response was to apply that exact same standard right back. You get yourself in a situation that puts me in jeopardy, that makes being associated with you a liability, then I am gone too. No conversation, no loyalty. Business is business, and this cuts both ways. At the time, that was just Joe Budden protecting himself, the same way Diddy was protecting Revolt. Looking at it now, with everything that has come out about what was actually happening inside Diddy's world during those years, Joe's instinct to draw that line for himself looks less like professional self-preservation and has been about where he stands post-Revolt, post-arrest, post-everything. And the position he is taking is not one of hatred. It is not one of score settling. It is one of simple disconnection. We work together. That chapter is closed. There is nothing left to discuss. What is interesting is how the people around him on this podcast push back on that. The suggestion is made that because Joe and Diddy worked together, because there was a professional relationship that was more than just cordial, it would not be strange to have a conversation if they crossed paths. At a basketball game, at an industry event, just two people who know each other exchanging words. Joe's response is essentially, to what end? What is the conversation? What does it accomplish? And underneath that is the unstated reality. Being seen talking to Diddy right now, even casually, even just bumping into him at the Knicks game and saying a few words. That picture exists. Someone takes that photo, it circulates, and then you are spending your time explaining something that you did not need to create in the first line that ends the conversation about whether Joe Budden would ever speak to Diddy again. Not the charges, not the trial, not the industry whispers that had been circulating for years before any of this became public. The Cassie hallway video, the footage that removed all ambiguity, all he said, she said, all room for interpretation. Joe Budden does not need a detailed explanation after that. He does not need to go through every allegation or parse every piece of evidence. One piece of footage is enough for him to make a permanent personal decision about who he wants in his world and who he does not. That is actually a pretty clean and simple moral position. You saw it with your own eyes. That is enough sure that this conversation paints. Because Joe Budden's experience at Revolt, the private meeting, the zero tolerance speech, the ditto moment, the eventual disconnection, is not just a personal story. It is a window into how Diddy built and maintained his professional world. Think about what that meeting actually was. Diddy did not bring Joe Budden in and say, "Here is your contract. Here is your role. Here are your deliverables." He brought Joe Budden to his house and had a personal conversation about behavior and boundaries before anything else was signed. That is not standard business practice. That is how you build a loyalty structure. You make the relationship personal before it becomes professional. You make the person feel like they are being brought into something, not just hired for a job. And it works. Joe Budden himself says he appreciated it. He felt good about it. He went into Revolt feeling like Diddy had given him a real shot when others had doubts. That dynamic, personal investment, clear expectations, the sense of being chosen, is exactly how you create environments where people feel obligated to you beyond just a paycheck. And it is also exactly how you create environments where people are reluctant to ask questions about things they might be seeing or hearing that do not sit right. Nobody at Revolt was going to rock the boat with the man who personally vouched for them and personally warned them what crossing a line would cost. That is not an accident. That is architecture. Joe Budden went to Diddy's house for a meeting that was supposed to stay private. He walked in as a new hire being evaluated. He walked out having made his own internal calculation about what his relationship with Diddy would actually mean on his terms. He said ditto in his head, and that ditto, that quiet, private decision to apply the same standard right back, might be the smartest thing Joe Budden did in that entire relationship. Because the man who sat across from him and talked about zero tolerance and protecting the business and not doing anything that puts everything at stake, that man is now in federal custody. Everything he built is under scrutiny. Everyone who moved in his circle is being asked what they knew and when they knew it. Joe Budden answered his own question before it was ever asked. He looked at a professional relationship with an expiration date attached and decided the terms were simple. You become a liability, personally, professionally, morally, then the relationship ends. No drama, no public statement, no loyalty that extends past the point where loyalty becomes self-destruction. He said what we got to talk about, and honestly, looking at everything that has come out since that private meeting at Diddy's house, that might be the most correct answer anyone in that industry has given about this entire situation. Drop a comment. Tell me what you think about how Diddy built Revolt and the kinds of relationships he created inside it. And if you want to stay on everything happening with this story as the case develops, subscribe, because there is a lot more still coming out.